Thank you everyone for joining. This session, as everyone knows, is on the future of content marketing. This is part of a series by GTM Now, media brand of GTM Fund, really focused on forward-looking insights, perspectives on go-to-market as a whole. And this is the inaugural session on content marketing. So we're overjoyed and excited to be here to speak about it and dig into a really kind of hot and relevant topic too. And one that personally ignites a lot of passion as a fellow marketer myself, which is the future of content marketing. So it's really at the center of today's discussion, rapidly evolving area of go-to-market, content marketing. And we're here today to really deep dive into the overall landscape of content marketing, its impact on go-to-market, and really where we are now, but most importantly, where are we going? Because that's going to allow everyone to stay a step ahead of the curve, especially in such a rapidly evolving area. And for context, I'm Sophie Buonassisi, VP of Marketing at GTM Now and GTM Fund. GTM Now is the media brand of GTM Fund, B2B SaaS venture firm. And I'm joined here by some of the most outstanding marketers in B2B SaaS who bring a ton of insight to the discussion. I'll start with a couple quick bios, and I could go on forever. These probably won't do it justice, but give a little bit of context. So Udi Ledergor is the chief evangelist at Gong. Before his current role, he was the CMO from 0 to hundreds of millions in ARR. He's a 5-time VP of marketing with 20 years of industry experience, heading world-class marketing teams for public and private companies across a variety of industries. He's also the author of The 50 Secrets of Trade Show Success, a popular public speaker, and a startup advisor. Udi is one of the best marketing executives in all of software, and he actually recently spoke to our portfolio companies on content marketing. So super excited to surface some of those insights today.
Happy to be here.
Jon Miller.
Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for being here. Jon Miller is a pioneer in the marketing technology space. Most recently, he was the CMO of Demandbase, company we love. He was previously the CEO and founder of Engagio, which merged with Demandbase in June 2020. Prior to that, he actually co-founded Marketo, the leading marketing automation platform, where he served as the CMO and played a key role in helping the company achieve an IPO and category leadership. So thanks for being here, Jon.
Absolutely.
And Pete Lorenco has over 15 years of experience accelerating marketing-driven pipeline and revenue for enterprise organizations, including EMC, Iron Mountain, Avid Technology, as well as early-stage companies such as Alice, Haiku, and now Path Factory, where he leads the marketing team. So Pete's passion for experimentation in the strategies and channels used to create, capture, and nurture new and existing customer demand. So thank you all for being here today.
Thank you.
And for anyone joining in, or everyone joining in, just a little bit of housekeeping. There is a chat. I can see here, you will want to switch your to when you're writing in the chat. So the default is to hosts and panelists. Please note that in order to actually contribute to the chat, you'll want to click that, switch it to everyone. And we'd love to hear, where is everyone calling in from? So location, name, role too. Be interested to see if anyone is more broadly on go-to-market or if everyone is more specific to marketing. Feel free to drop your LinkedIn if you want to connect with other folks like-minded who are interested in the future of content marketing. So last bit of housekeeping before we dive in. Questions, throw them in the chat anytime. We'll answer them within the flow of the conversation. If it makes sense to hold it to the end, we can do so, but otherwise we'll keep kind of flowing through as we go. So please note, pop them in the chat and we'll answer them as we go. Now, without further ado, if we think about the overall landscape of content marketing, of course, in order to understand where we're going, it's helpful to really look at that landscape, kind of where we are, where we came from. And now all three of you have been in marketing for many years and have had different vantage points of content marketing. So as a starting point, I'd like to do a little bit of a around the horn and hear from each of you on, what content marketing is right now and kind of what it was for you in the early days, almost a little bit of nostalgia compared to now. And Jon, you have an interesting angle from the marketing automation side, having served as the CMO of Marketo since inception when you co-founded it in 2005 for many years. and then going on to found Engagio and serving as CMO of Demandbase. So why don't we start with yourself? What role, if any, did content marketing really have when you founded Marketo and served as CMO? How has that evolved, and kind of major shifts are you seeing right now in terms of strategies?
Well, it's funny. I sort of fell into discovering content marketing when we were starting Marketo. The other job I was considering was an analyst at Forrester, covering the marketing technology space. And so when I ultimately decided to turn that down and do Marketo, I told myself, but I still want to write stuff about, and like think big thoughts about where all this stuff is going. So I actually started writing our blog before we even wrote our first line of code at Marketo. And I sort of discovered that worked out really well to build our brand, because by the time we launched the product, we actually had some awareness and following. So, I formed this belief that in B2B, the classic B2B brand was IBM. Nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. And that's all about, B2B brands are all about trust, and people trust thought leaders and experts. And content was a great way to do that. Over time at Marketo, my content got bigger and bigger. I started writing these definitive guides, which ended up being great lead magnets as well as thought leadership. But the world's changed. My most recent big book I wrote at Demandbase did not perform as well as my Marketo definitive guides did. It's just harder to get people to download these big, meaty 200-page ebooks. People recognize today if they fill out a form, they're probably going to start getting unwanted phone calls and emails and stuff that they don't want. They're being more anonymous. So I think we're starting to see an evolution of what content marketing means, the formats that people are using. I know we're going to talk about that a lot more, and I don't want to take more airtime before we get the other guys on. But the other big factor I just do want to throw out there is then obviously Gen AI in the last 18 months, as a creator explosion of mediocre content. And I think we're moving more and more in a world of not just Gen AI, but synth AI, where AI will not just be creating content for us, but will be synthesizing and summarizing content that other people are creating. Whether that's Google searches that no longer go to the website, but just give you the answer on Google, or our email client summarizing our emails without us even reading them. And so ultimately, I think where this needs to go is marketers need to evolve, content marketing needs to evolve to something that AI can't summarize, and that's experiences. So that's kind of my high level point of view.
No, that's great. And I want to dig more into the experience as we go, but that's fantastic.
Yep.
Really seen, exactly. You've really seen kind of it shift from these longer form blogs over to now, where it's forcing function to be experiences and what AI cannot replicate. Udi, what about yourself?
So I'll pick up where Jon left off. Here's a fun stat for you all. According to the American Psychological Association, the average American's attention span has fallen from 150 seconds in 2004, right before Jon started writing his ebooks for Marketo, to 75 seconds in 2012, when Jon was doing Engagio, to just 47 seconds in 2023, when he was doing that ebook for Demandbase. And I think that's a very telling story. And I think Jon's experience mirrors that lowered attention span that we're all feeling. There's a reason why my kids prefer watching a 15-second TikTok video, or at most searching for a 3-minute YouTube tutorial, rather than opening up a book or a manual on how to do something that they need to do. And we have to be aware of that change. I've had very similar experience to Jon's, showing that the only ones reading the 200-page or even the 20-page ebooks anymore are your competitors. Nobody else is reading them. And yes, industry analysts writes them, and sometimes you need to supply them to a IT buyer who might still like literally weigh the paper to see how serious a vendor you are. But for most people, having the content be short and sweet that they can consume in the middle of a busy day is really a requirement. So that's one big change that we're seeing, and we all need to pay attention to. So if you
Can I interrupt your flow for a sec, though, Udi?
Please.
So I've seen some of the same stats about attention span as well. and I have a Gen Z daughter. And at the same time, like she'll sit down and binge watch, 8 hours of How I Met Your Mother.
Yes.
So I think the attention span conversation is a little more nuanced.
100%.
It's not just, oh, attention spans are shorter, but also the bar for what needs to grab attention is higher.
1,000,000%. And that's a really important distinction. There's a famous like Netflix joke that like, hey, you want to come over watch a 12-hour movie? Like, heck no, who has time for that? Okay, you want to come over watch 12 episodes of a 1 hour show? Sure. What time should I come over? It's just a matter of how we frame that, right? So you do need to grab people's attention. And I think despite our best efforts, most B2B content does not meet the Netflix bar for interest and engagement. So being aware of that, let's at least keep it short to give people a chance to get through it. If you can create Netflix quality content, I absolutely recommend that you do it.
Yeah.
So I'd say that is one thing, and maybe that is a good note to also add. I think I mentioned this on our previous webinar, so please keep me honest. But one of the bars, as long as we're talking about Netflix, one of the bars that I think more content teams should be putting on themselves is: would people pay to consume this content? Is my content good enough that people would pay for it? And I know some people that sounds like a preposterous idea, like who's going to pay for B2B content? Well, all of us, everyone in this room has a subscription to either the New York Times or Spotify or YouTube or Netflix or Masterclass. So we're all paying for content, and we realize that good content is valuable, and we are happy to pay for it. Are you creating content that someone would actually consider paying for? If not, you might want to go back and see, like, what do I need to do so it's not just an expanded press release of my latest product that really nobody cares about, unless you're a Google or a OpenAI, right? People care about their product releases, or Apple, but there's probably a handful of companies that people care about product releases. Everyone else, we need to be working much harder to create content that people would want to consume for the sake of the content itself.
Mm-hmm. Great point. Great point. And we're kind of seeing that in terms of there's twofold. There's the content itself, but then there's also the distribution of that content. I've seen some companies do it quite well in terms of rolling out series Netflix style where it is bingeable. So rather than a longer podcast, it's actually more of a mini series. And personally, I've binged them. Fascinating. So we're seeing that distribution kind of come through too. Pete, what about yourself?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm taking notes. So when I think about my journey real quick, I was one of those people creating and writing blogs 15 years ago in my first job. We won't name the company, but hundreds of blogs. And, there's two parts for me when I think about content before and now. One of them is the content types and the type of content we're creating then versus now, right? Content consumption's changed, the mediums have changed. I'm sure we'll get to some of that later. But there's also distribution. So when I think back to younger Pete, writing a lot of blogs and literally just building it and hoping people would find it, right? So you just kind of put it out there, put it on your website, maybe send an email, and pull people in. And hopefully by now everyone in the audience knows, like, that's not quite the way it works these days, but truthfully, that was the strategy. And when I think about the evolution for myself and for all the marketers that I've spent time with or learned from, or like the Jons and Udis who I've admired growing up in my own career, my evolution itself has been, how do I create memorable experiences? So like the story I like to use with people is my father owns a restaurant or owned restaurants growing up. And the thing that always upset me is somebody would walk in that, like, right as we close the kitchen. And if any of you ever run a kitchen or just think about your own kitchen, turning on an oven, shutting it off, cleaning it, the worst thing you do after you've cleaned an entire kitchen has to turn equipment back on because it takes a long time to clean. So when you start cleaning stuff, like when you're shutting it all off, ready to go, and someone walks in, and my dad would always take those clients. And his thing was, Pete, you never know where they come from. You don't know who they know. You don't know what they've been through. And I've always tried to employ that just in marketing in general, and content being a byproduct of that, which is, how do we deliver things that people get to talk about, they share, and they're willing to put their neck out in line and say, like, this is something that Gong or Udi or Demand-Based or Marketo put out, and like, you need to check this out. And for me, like, the big evolution is, how do you balance, I believe the biggest trends are, how do you balance education with entertainment? So like when Udi talks about paying for content, which I love, I wrote that, like, Udi, I love that. For me, it's things that I'd be willing to pay for is like exclusive research, benchmark reports, things that I can't get anywhere else that's unique to like your customer data set or things of that nature, or things that are super entertaining. It might be a short video. It might be a long video that shows me different use cases about how to do different things. Like that's what comes to mind for me as the type of stuff that I'm trying to gravitate to, and where I've seen success in marketing more so now. It's really that key balance of education and entertainment, which we'll get there. I have quite a few stories. I created a zombie video where I starred in it. Well, maybe we'll talk about that later, but like that's a long time ago, probably not the prettiest looking zombie in the world, but that type of content, totally different. People were like, this is great. And that's how I knew it was working, right? It wasn't, I got 50 leads. It wasn't that we created $1 million in pipeline. It was customers directly responding, being like, this is the best thing ever. Totally get it. Please do more of this. But the funny part was, what people didn't know is when I pitched that idea, the brand teams, the executives, they're all like, please don't do this. Only do it on Halloween. Because they were afraid of like how it would be viewed in terms of brand story, right? Or brand point of view. When the reality is like, the key is what Udi said or what Jon said. It's like, how do you entertain? How do you create experiences? And would people pay for it to watch it? And the funny thing is, people would pay for the zombie video. They definitely wouldn't have paid for the 15 blogs that I wrote, 15 years ago. So anyways, that's
look at ticket sales to the Forrester and Gardner conferences versus Dave Chappelle and Seinfeld. Who do you think is selling more tickets?
That's a very good point. Very good point. Well, with that, I mean, we've heard a couple things across the board around creating experiences, producing content people would pay for, things you can't find anywhere else, memorable experiences, edutainment, if you will. Previously, when we talk about blogs and producing that, it was more of a cadence, right? If we think about what we're in now and moving towards, it sounds like these are more unique experiences. How do the three of you think about actually producing and creating this system for marketers? So any marketers listening that want to create these kind of unique experiences, how do you balance that with having a steady cadence for actually creating content?
I mean, I can start. I'm in the middle of producing one right now. And the truth is we're a small organization with limited resources. So the key for us is we're bringing in individuals who are subject matter experts that are related to the audience that we're trying to reach, who we've spent time explaining our point of view and our narrative as a company. Because whatever content we want to put out, while the goal is to entertain, there's also a component that we want to be able to help educate. That's sort of like an indirect component of the product and what we do or the use cases we solve. And the truth is the resources we're bringing in are really just helping with the strategy and a lot of the production or execution, because the reality is we're just not experts in those regards. So for me personally, like the journey, because in past lives, I've done elements of the production and doing all the inception and the ideas and post-production and distribution on social media or whatever it is. And it's a lot of work. And truthfully, and if you don't have the resources to invest in the full-time production teams and content managers and all that, which can be a luxury for some companies, then my best advice is, for probably cheaper than you think, you can find through different, whether it's Upwork or Fiverr, there's resources that can help with post-video editing. There's resources that you can likely find that I'm happy to recommend offline that would help with ideation. There's different firms out there that can help with tying your narrative to those ideation and maybe help you put on the first 5 or 10 and connect you with influencers like an Udi or Jon or whoever it might be and get them onto your show or whatever the angles are that you're trying to. So for me, so I feel like the big thing has been, I know I have a vision for the type of content I want to put out that balances that education entertainment. I also know that I have resource limitations. So my focus has been, how do I extend the ability to produce that by bringing in 2 or 3 different pieces that help me actually produce it. And truthfully, we're probably looking at about $1,500 a show. And our goal is to produce something weekly or bi-weekly. So there's that on, sort of like what Jon and Udi were talking about earlier with Netflix or any service like that. The big focus for us is how do we consistently show up for audience, but in a way that when Jon talks about his child being interested in watching How You Met Your Mother, maybe it was live or now it's on demand. But there was a time where we all log in. It's like Sunday nights, Game of Thrones, or now it's the Game of Thrones prequel. But whatever it is, like we know at this time, got to get on HBO or got to get on whatever that service is and log into my favorite show or my favorite event or whatever it might be. For me in B2B, my focus is how do I produce a show that Udi knows every time at this week, this month, this day, we're going to put out something that's a balance of education, entertainment. But what he doesn't know is the way I'm producing that is this mix of people that are just helping. Hopefully that helps.
Yep. Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And I mean, kind of takes off for a lot of marketers is less worrying about the actual production, because especially with AI, which we've touched on slightly, we've got, I mean, endless resources to actually support. It's really shifting towards the uniqueness and how do we create that actual kind of strategic content that will capture people. So with that, we can dig more into the content, but I'm curious in terms of the mediums for the content itself that you found most effective currently, or that you think we're moving towards, because we've talked about bingeable. And if we think about how that's shifting now, what are we really moving towards? Udi, do you want to start us off?
Happy to. My approach to channels is pretty simplistic, as most effective things are. And it is first showing up to where the party is happening, and then inviting folks to come over to yours. Think about it. If you were to organize a great party at your place, but nobody really knows where you live or that the party's happening, like you'd be kind of stuck there eating all the pizza and drinking all the beer yourself, which is maybe not a bad idea, but it's not what you were after. And the same goes for marketing, both in the offline world and in the online world. So when we started at Gong, honestly, 8 years ago, I did not know whether salespeople and their leaders are living on Twitter or on YouTube or on LinkedIn or on Facebook, and I tested them all. And within a few short months, we clearly saw that LinkedIn is where they live. And Twitter has its own flavor of, I'll call them industry influencers and speakers and authors and consultants that kind of live there. But the ones that we were looking to do business with, the sales leaders and professionals, they were living on LinkedIn. And we quickly understood it. It sounds trivial and obvious now, but it was not when we started. That's where they always have a LinkedIn tab open for finding their next deal or job or employee or partnership or whatever it is. And so that's where we need to be. And so we started creating all of our content optimized for LinkedIn and then repurposing it with very little work to other channels just to have a presence. But by doing that, for example, we were the first company to do LinkedIn Live. LinkedIn actually came to us because they saw how engaging our content was and said, Gong, we think you'd be the perfect candidate to alpha test LinkedIn Live with us. And it was the clunkiest experience ever. We needed like 3 people with duct tape and things holding equipment together just to get it done. But we did it, and it was pretty successful. And we kept optimizing all the time for LinkedIn. And if you haven't ever read the LinkedIn engineering blog, there's some really interesting stuff in there. I'll give you one fun example. So a few years ago, I stumbled upon an engineering blog post from LinkedIn saying that they were testing a new dwell factor for their feed algorithm. Essentially what that meant is that they were rewarding posts where people spend a lot of time on before they kept scrolling. So I thought, well, what's the dumbest thing I can do to get people to stop scrolling? And I asked my team, can we quickly design one of those Where's Waldo images, like where you see a beach with 1,000 people on it, but instead of Waldo, hide Bruno the Bulldog, our mascot at Gong on it? And they did that, and we posted it the next day, and it blew up because I'd hacked the LinkedIn algorithm. People stopped to look for that silly dog, and it had nothing to do with business, but I just wanted to prove a point that I understand how the algorithm worked, and I could make it work. And then we thought about more work-related posts for doing that, but you can only get to that level of understanding if you're really focused on 1 or 2 channels. There's no team that can do this on 20 channels. So figure out where your audience lives and go show up there, whether it's the industry events or the social media that they consume or the newsletter that they read or the groups that they discuss in, and then find clever ways of bringing them back to your place, which is obviously your website. And I'm sure Peter has a lot to say on that and the many advantages of doing that, because once you have them on your website, that's where you can actually convert the anonymous readers to a known lead and start nurturing them and dripping content about your product eventually.
Definitely. Great point.
If I could add, I think one thing I like to think about when it comes to channels I think I agree with everything Udi said. I also think what was once old is becoming new again. So,
Except me.
right? No direct reference to ages on this. Um, when I think about everyone right now talks about social media or those types of channels, communities, there's all this noise around those things. And that's where everyone gravitates to for obvious reasons. That's where a lot of content consumption is naturally happening. But there's other ways to create experiences for your prospects or your customers or your audience that can stand out. And one of, for me, one of the ways that I've found that's been most successful is to reach people personally via direct mail or things of that nature. And it doesn't sound sexy, y'all, but it works.
100%.
Now it's got complexity, obviously, with remote working and things of that nature. But between platforms that are out there, and things of that nature, it's a lot easier than it might seem. The costs are not as extreme as one might think. And done right, whether it's to you, Sophie, or to Udi or John or myself, when you put together something that's thoughtful, truly personalized, like I know John is into X or Udi's into Y and is in San Fran and maybe he loves this restaurant, and I spend time to go and get that item from that restaurant sent to Udi's house, for example. Not to say this is what I would do, Udi, but maybe I would. That's going to get Udi's attention. I'd like to think it would get his attention, right? Like that showed that you took time to get to know Udi. You've explored things that he might be interested in. You've explored things he's talked about, and then you deliver something to him right at his front door. That's a really clever, interesting way where you can have that be joined by a note, right? Or some type of piece of content or some type of insight that you want to share. And I am fairly confident any of the people on this panel or any of the people that you're reaching out to, you'll get a response. The other thing I would say is, one last thing is I was one of those individuals sitting on an audience like this and being afraid to ask. So whether it was like, hey, audience member, like what type of content worked best for you? Or if I was trying to reach you, like what could I send or what could I say? And I was always just afraid to make the ask. One piece of advice for all of you is don't be afraid to ask. People are more willing than you think to help. And just simply reaching out to your audience and saying like, hey, what type of information would you find most useful? Or if I did X, would you find that useful or interesting or helpful? Reach out to your peers. I was just telling you, I reached out to a former team member of his, and we're just brainstorming and riffing on different ideas and thoughts. People are willing to help. And one of the easiest ways that I've seen success as I've gravitated is trying to, instead of solving all the issues or challenges myself, it was asking my peers, asking customers, getting on customer calls, listening to Gong recordings or tools like Gong. All that insight can help to determine if I should use social media or this community or LinkedIn, or maybe it's just old school, build a package and ship it to someone's house. So
one thing I've been struck by, keyed off of the everything old is new again point, has been the rise of Substack newsletters.
Yep.
Because in some ways that feels like it's going against everything we've talked about so far. It's email. Like who uses email? It's long form written content. Like who wants to read that? And yet that's working. So I think that goes back to, in many ways, it's less about the medium. It's more about the quality of what you're delivering. Some people pay for these Substack newsletters, right? Is it worthy of actually something that you would pay for? So, and I guess the other thing rattling around in my head here, is there's almost two dimensions to quality that we've talked about. There's probably more, but we've talked about two. One is thought leadership, like, or more just generally speaking, is this like fundamentally useful to help somebody in their career, right? And then the other dimension is entertainment, right? Is this just plain fun, to kind of interact with? I think it's important to have a mix of both. I think it's really hard to get something that actually delivers on both. I'm curious if people have seen examples of that, but it's worth recognizing that there are those two different dimensions of quality.
Great points. And it's interesting you say Substack because it's, grown incredibly, and they're actually shifting their platform to be a little bit more creator forward. But part of it is that it is very person forward as opposed to company forward. And that can also be part of that, where people are really seeking for authentic, unique.
I think that's a good insight. Yeah. There's some other platform that's not Substack that's exactly trying to be that, right? It's a creator email platform. Peter was nodding. Do you remember what it's called? I forget.
I forgot the name, but I know I can visually see. I'm just the name's escaping me.
It'll come to us. It'll come to us.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, so that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Sounds like mediums are changing. And if I were to play that back, Pete, I think you had a really interesting point too, that people can use as a takeaway is really looking at the insights to inform your mediums, picking, like Udi said, round 2, not going too broad to actually optimize for, and then repurposing to others. And then Pete, you touched on something which I thought was really interesting. And that was actually using the content as almost part of the nurture to then feed into perhaps a mailing campaign or something even more personal when you can see that people are engaged in your content.
Yeah, like we all have personal interests, right? We're all humans. I think this is another key thing. And I felt victim in the past of like creating content because I had like my goal was to produce X number of blogs or to get X number of leads or to create X number of pipeline. And I always forgot that there was a human that at the end of the day I'm trying to reach. And for me, like, and maybe it dates back to my time at Alice, but when we spent time to understand the human behind someone and we knew that their interests were X or Y, and we led with that versus I'm trying to sell you something. I'm trying to get you to read this ebook or this playbook or this benchmark report. I personally have found that leading with someone's personal interest and using that as a lead in. And I saw the comment. Yes, there's my example of Udi is definitely creepy, and that was just an example to get the conversation going. But
I will gladly consume any
I'm sure.
selected dish from a local restaurant.
But the point being is, if you spend time at the end of the day, what we're all hoping for is, right? Netflix knows that my personal interests are X and Y. I've spent time viewing this type of content, these types of movies, or maybe this particular actor or actress is of personal interest, and I spend a lot of time consuming that type of content. If they then, now that I think they serve up ads and stuff, but now imagine Netflix knows that you're into action movies with these types of actors and actresses, and now they start feeding you content. It's like, here's how those movies are produced, and they're looking for sponsors to produce the next video. Maybe it's in this. You're going to be more likely to consume that content because it's far related into what you're naturally consuming. And the ironic part is they could be serving that via ads or other content that has nothing to do with the movie that you watch, but based on the information that they're consuming and those insights, they're feeding you new types of content or ads, right? And I don't know exactly how Netflix algorithm is working, but I'm almost certain it's probably in that regard. We can absolutely do the same things with B2B, and there's plenty of tools that would enable you to do those elements. But the key goes back to that, right? Personally, what are the things that you care about? And how do I, as an individual, tap into those things? But not forgetting that my goal is, how do I create I've always geared it towards, how do I create a memorable experience for someone? If I achieve that, then the end results of leads, pipeline, revenue, I've always found that comes as long as I don't lose sight of that. When I lose sight of memorable experiences and I go towards create a lead, I find that the content I produced or the channel I'm using or the experience I'm delivering usually falls flat. So that's how I've always looked. That's how I've always viewed it.
To jump in with one more thought that risking being Captain Obvious here, but it still stuns me how many companies get this wrong. Content marketing does not equal product marketing. I'll say that again and then explain. Content marketing does not equal product marketing. They're two very different disciplines, if you ask me. And one of the reasons I think our content at Gong has always been a beacon of what successful content marketing looks like is because I had different people on different teams reporting to different VPs, creating content marketing and product marketing. And I didn't mix their KPIs or their goals or the content that they were creating. Content marketing is meant to write content that provides value to an audience that one day, maybe years from now, has the potential to become a Gong customer. We're not trying to sell them the product today. Product marketing, on the other hand, is responsible for bottom of the funnel, short-term deals that they need to explain how we're different than our competitors that the audience might be considering, or about the category that we're creating. And that's very product focused, as the name product marketing suggests. But content marketing is something so different. And when you try mixing them, here's a classic example we've all seen, right? 5 tips for some big trend that everyone cares about. And the first tip is somewhat interesting. And the second tip is, if you buy our product, you can now do this and this. Okay, you just lost me there and your credibility, because I was hoping for some real thought leadership. As Peter described it, he was willing to pay for industry insights. But if item number 2 on your list of industry insights is you've got to buy my product, you're no longer giving me valuable content. You're just giving me a very cheaply veiled sales pitch for your product. And that's not what I was in the market for. So separate those. If you can afford to have different people working on those different types of content, great. I'm sure it can be done with the same person or the same team, but those are different sets of metrics and goals of what you're asking your content marketing to achieve and what you're asking your product marketing to achieve.
Udi, do you think that gets blurred for PLG companies?
Ask the first part of the question again, because I'm not sure I heard you.
I said, does it get blurred?
Does
You
it
know,
get blurred?
Like, sure, like you have like, somebody who's trialing it, but content, like how to get the most out of this, 5 things you can do on Canva you didn't know you could do when like you're in an onboarding experience or something.
So if you're giving the Canva experience, I would say that there's probably a huge audience wanting to learn about design tips, how to A/B test your designs, why does typography matter? What are complementary colors? That would be content marketing, and 5 things you didn't know you could do with Canva. That's good product marketing. I hope I didn't give the impression that product marketing sucks and is unnecessary. Couldn't be farther from the truth. But I would say if I'm looking to cast a wide net and build an audience for future Canva customers, I would start a design blog or newsletter, because there's a huge audience of millions, if not billions of people. I subscribe to design newsletters. I'm not a designer. I just care about that stuff. But then when you want to convert them to Canva, that's when you trickle in here are 5 things that you didn't know you could do. So hopefully I answered that question.
Yeah, I just wonder if it's a little blurrier with market. You keep talking about content for non-customers, top of the funnel, product marketing for
traditional enterprise sales motion. Yes.
I'm just sort of really asking what happens post-sale.
Yeah, so you're right. It has to be a mixture, right? Because you do want to get customers to understand the deeper use cases of your product. It's a project I'm currently doing. If anyone saw my LinkedIn post of this morning, I posted a short update on how it's going. So a week ago, I posted giving some availability to Gong customers who want to learn about marketing use cases of our product. And I got 70 meeting requests last week.
Yeah, I saw that.
Plowing through right now. So
I'm one of them, by the way.
Thank you. Looking forward to meeting you. So
I'd have more after this session.
And probably getting more requests now. So I absolutely agree with you, John, that post-sales, you want some of that quality content to be 5 things you can do with the product that you didn't think you could do. I won't pretend to have figured it out yet, because as I'm meeting, I've had 17 meetings with customers in the last week. Not one of them knew the tip that I shared this morning, that Gong can actually track the slides that your sales reps are showing. So we're clearly not delivering that content at the reach and the level that we should be.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at what product marketing is used to, a lot of really long form, like product documentation and all that technical help center. Well, when was the last time you went to a help center of one of the products you're using? I think we have to change our thinking about that. I'm sure that from the post with the 1 screenshot that I posted today on LinkedIn, more people are going to start using the slide tracker than all of the readers of our technical help center ever did.
I agree with that 100%.
Sophie, could I ask a question of the panel? Do you mind?
Yeah.
We're just taking over here.
Like John, I'm curious, and because I'm experiencing this myself, and I've had a lot of conversations with marketers about this. How do you think about structuring a content team today than maybe in the past? And what do you think are the critical components of a good content team nowadays? Hope that's okay, Sophie.
Yeah, no, I mean, so to answer that, it's I almost need to I'm surprised we've gotten this far in the call without talking about Gong Labs. Just because like every time I talk about content, I use Gong Labs as a great example, and I was just waiting for Udi to like bring it up. So maybe before I answer Peter's question, Udi, do you want to just really quickly tell people what Gong Labs is and like why, and then I can build on why I think it's a perfect example of what content marketing should be.
Happy to, and thank you for that layup, John. Appreciate you. So when I joined Gong, I was the first marketer and employee number 13 way back in August 1st, 2016. And I know how to do content marketing for B2B demand gen. That's how I grew several companies before. And my first question to Amit, our CEO, was, what content do you have that I can use? And he said, I've got nothing. Like, we just started the company. I've got nothing. I'm like, come on, you've got to have something maybe from an investor presentation. And he showed me these 5 slides that he put together after analyzing the first 20,000 calls of our beta customers. We had 12 beta customers. The engineering team analyzed 20,000 calls, and they found some really exciting insights, like salespeople who speak for about 46% of the time get a better chance of keeping the customer on the call because they're not taking it over by speaking too much. But if they speak too little, then they're not really presenting their case or doing anything like that. And they found out that if you ask on a discovery call between 4 and 11 questions, that's kind of the sweet spot. More than that, it feels like an inquisition, and less than that, you're not going to learn anything. So we had 5 slides like that, and I said, I mean, this is perfect. I added a title slide that said the 5 secrets of the perfect sales pitch, and I saved that as a PDF. And I started using that. I quickly built an email campaign and a landing page to gate it behind, and people started downloading it. And what we realized is, even though there's well over 100,000 books on sales on Amazon, the search caps at 100,000. So I don't know if it's 1 million or 5 million, but there's over 100,000 books on sales on Amazon if you go search for them. They're mostly based on someone's experience of, Aaron ran SDR for Salesforce, or someone else ran a sales team at Xerox, and they wrote a great book about their experience. But there were very few books showing data on what actually works and doesn't work in sales. And we figured that if we're going to sell to sales professionals and sales leaders, we might as well cast a broad net and produce content that sales leaders will love and actually use, whether or not they decide to buy our product this year. And that's how Gong Labs was born. It was born on these insights that were exclusive analysis that Peter said he would pay for. I'll invoice you after this call. So we took these insights from our actual customer conversations and start producing insight on what's working and not working in sales. And I'll end with just a fun example that usually comes up. A few years ago, we asked our sales team to figure out what is the impact of salespeople who use swear words like the S word or the F-bomb on sales calls. And they did the analysis, and miraculously, they found that salespeople who swear on calls have an 8% higher win rate. And so we decided to publish that, and we did. And the press picked up on it, and fastcompany.com ran with it, and radio station called in to get me to talk about it on air. And the internet went wild, with a majority of the audience using all this colorful vocabulary to comment, like, this is the shit I've been talking about, and Marion, you've got to see what Udi just said. This is what I've been saying the whole time. And then we had another smaller group, which was appalled that we would suggest to use this type of language in a professional setting. But that was a marketer's dream come true. This is exactly the type of conversation that we're looking to create. So I'll stop here because I've already hijacked John's attempt to answer the question.
That was great. But again, I think, it's a perfect example of where I think one of the major trends of content are going, which is you got to produce content that, only you can produce, that's grounded in original research and data, kind of from your unique data set. So if you believe that, then you need somebody on your content team who's capable of producing such a thing. Udi, you had I think a full-time person for a while who was kind of doing that. I was, as I was leaving the demand-based CMO role, I was in the process of getting somebody hired to kind of do exactly that. So I do think that's an emerging role that is not typically part of the content team. The other thing that I think that's sort of interesting part of content team, is we've talked about experiences, right? Experiences can mean lots of different things. It can mean, private virtual events from all the way up to, dinners, all the way up to like big user conferences. And, should the content team be called the experiences team? You know, and do you then start need a different set of skills who are, you know, not writers, but are really thinking about delivering experiences in different ways and different channels? You know, is a podcast an experience? Is a TikTok an experience? You know, so anyway, I don't know the answer, but I'm sort of, you know, saying if we think original content and research and experiences, and ultimately probably I should add communities, are all part of where the future's content going, I think it does suggest a different org structure.
Just add one sentence, and I'll let Peter add if he wants to everything John said, which of course I'd sign off on. And that is to help people decide whether you should bring a professional content creator / writer versus a domain expert on what your audience cares about. And I would choose a domain expert on what your audience cares about, because they are the only ones who can speak authentically to them in a way that will not trigger your audience's bullshit meter, pardon my French. Because if you get someone who is in the morning writing for a cybersecurity company, in the afternoon writing for an e-commerce company, and then writing for a business platform, everyone can smell the bullshit from a mile away. They're just Googling 5 generic tips that everyone else has already read and Googled, because they can't go any levels below that deeper.
Sure. And AI can do that just as well these days.
Yes.
But I would say there's something else that maybe is even equally important, right? Which is, we already talked a little bit about the importance of personal brands, right? And how people are connecting, whether it's a Substack or, you know, a personal brand. I mean, people often want to hear from Udi, not from Gong, you know? And, you know, I think a key skill set of the best content marketer, experience marketers is somebody who, for whatever set of reasons, either naturally can or wants to be building their personal brand, you know, and whether that's an executive or somebody, you know, less senior, you know, I think the only way you get the drive to push to, like, let me respond to every comment and let me do this and let me do that, you know, the stuff that you have to do to really excel here,
1,000,000%.
because you're building a personal brand as well as your company brand.
And thank you for debunking the myth about it has to be an executive like the CEO or the chief product officer. That's nonsense. At Gong, we built so many personal brands. Chris Orlob was my first content marketer. He was an unknown salesperson doing his first marketing job. He was a domain expert on sales, but I had to teach him the ropes of demand gen and how to connect the pieces of content into a demand gen content. And of course, he's blown up as a huge celebrity in his own right. And then Devin Reed replaced him 3 years later. Devin was a mid-market AE at Gong, never a marketing person before, but he built a huge brand. He's got double the followers that I have, and I'm the executive that he was working under, but he built a wonderful, wonderful brand. And then other people who weren't even on the team, like Sarah Brazier, who went from SDR to AE at Gong. She documented her journey and we supported that storytelling. She blew up on LinkedIn and she's a huge celebrity in her own right. So you don't have to get the executive, just someone who's passionate, like John said, willing to do the work and is a domain expert, because salespeople listen to other salespeople. They don't want to listen to a marketer. They want to listen to other salespeople.
There's this whole thing of like founder brands, which is like, that's going around the startup community, which is fine if you're that kind of founder.
Yes. If you were that, if you did the
job. If you are not that kind of founder, you will not be successful trying to replicate that strategy.
If you walked in the shoes, if you went from SDR to founder, by all means, you can speak to SDRs. But unless you did that, they're probably not going to listen to you.
I think Carta has a good example of that too. Like Peter Walker, who's their head of insights, he started posting.
I love his posts. I love his posts.
Processing the data, and he's just blown up, and it's unique.
Amazing.
Point, John, unique insight that you can't get anywhere else. So seeing more of that.
I share so much of his posts internally and with other people. They're super insightful.
They're fantastic. Being cognizant of time, we've got about 5 minutes left. I know we've got a couple questions in the chat that we've answered as we've gone. If anybody does have any additional questions, feel free to throw them in. Otherwise, I'd love to hear Pete, Udi, and John. We've touched on experiences, how everyone's thinking about the future. What are you actually doing today to prepare for the future? Like, what are those campaigns as you look towards H2 that you're really excited about and looking to actually implement in your organizations?
I mean, I can go. I just don't want to like monopolize it. So the big focus for us, I sort of hinted at it earlier. So one is we're trying to produce a regular scheduled live event show with the idea of bringing in. So the benefit I have is I market to my peers, so B2B sales and marketing professionals predominantly. So we're trying to bring in experts in different areas, whether that's content marketing or brand, events, whatever. And we want to discuss and unpack different things that help people do their jobs. And that's something that we want to have as regular scheduled. We'll share it, and then we'll build a lot of our content distribution strategy via emails, newsletters. We might have blogs or webinars that then depict that further, right? So we might do something with Udi and then do a follow-up webinar similar to this with Udi to depict parts of it further, or based on questions and feedback we get, be like, hey, let's do a whole nother session on, hey, Udi, we got these 5 questions. How do we unpack those further? The other big focus for us, like from a content perspective, is we're trying to produce very similar to Gong. I'll admit we're getting a lot of the inspiration from what Gong's done. So similar for us at Path Factory, we have a lot of unique customer data based on content consumption. So we're trying to produce both industry level reports and just broader overall content engagement reports. And then our goal is how do we distribute those as almost like a marketable moment every month. So in addition to that regular scheduled production show, how do we stay top of mind with our buyers in regards to either unique insight or entertainment, that every month I have some reason to say, hey, Udi, John, Sophie, please check us out. This is worth your time. Here's why. So that's how we're thinking about it. I'll admit it's been a lot of trial and error. I am not the most well-known or fancy marketer. I'm definitely more introverted, so I'm not as public on LinkedIn and stuff. But I would say through that trial and error, in my experience over multiple different companies, whether it was IT infrastructure, cybersecurity, or now companies like Path Factory and B2B marketing, that strategy's always worked. As long as I'd never lost sight on the experience component, and I always try to stay top of mind, I'm giving people a reason either through education or entertainment to tune in. So
That's a great way of, I mean, casting that kind of broader, if you will, content net, and then actually using that data and insights to then further revise and kind of refine the content strategy. Udi, what about yourself?
So I'm in a unique position now that last year I handed over the reins to the marketing team to another CMO. I'm now back to basics and running my own social media. Nobody's creating content for me. Nobody's distributing content for me. So I've got to do a lot of the things that I had people who did for me in the past, which I'm finding fascinating. So as an example, a couple of months ago, I decided to get a lot more serious about my LinkedIn profile. And rather than random acts of posting, I'm posting daily now. And I'm looking at analytics every day, and I'm rediscovering like what's trending in terms of content formats. And it turns out that Sunday at 4 a.m. is actually a really, really good time to post, as my post of the last couple of Sundays have shown. They're some of the most highest performing posts. Like, who knew, right? Sunday, 4 a.m. It actually works. And I'm trying to balance between the Gong content that I'm paid to promote, because that is my job, literally as chief evangelist. But I know that if I post about our product every day, it's going to get boring, as we've been discussing. So I'm balancing that with some of the marketing lessons that I've learned that have a lot of audience on LinkedIn, with maybe one inspirational post a week, whether it's me playing the piano that people for some reason like, or some inspirational quote about kids' summer vacation that I did on Sunday. And I'm just playing with that balance and seeing what's working and what's trending, and using that platform to get the good word of Gong out there.
Very cool. Well, be careful. Now everyone's going to start trying posting it on Sunday.
Hopefully everyone starts following me. That's what I'm trying to do here.
There we go. John, what are you seeing on your end?
Well, I'm in an interesting spot personally, because I left Demandbase at the end of last year, and I'm in the early days of starting my new company. And we're stealth right now. So it's probably the first time in my entire career I find myself without a company to be promoting. As I said, at Marketo, I was writing my blog before we wrote the first line of code. And in Engagio, I mean, I wrote the Clearing Complete Guide to ABM, in the first 4 months of the business. And here, you're not going to hear me talk about my new company publicly for the next year or so. So it creates this interesting dynamic. So, for better or worse, I've been doing more myself on LinkedIn. sharing thought leadership, mostly just to have an outlet and a place to go, with some of this kind of stuff. But, I'm really looking forward to getting this product built and then actually building a go-to-market and actually building an experiences team and, kind of building a modern go-to-market that looks, I think, very different for the kind of where buying is going, not where it's been. So I'm in an interesting spot right now.
I love it because you're all in very different spots. So it's always interesting to hear how everyone's thinking about it. Wonderful. Well, I know for time's sake, we are just at the end. We do have to wrap a couple minutes early, give everyone back a few minutes of transition, both on the audience side and ourselves as panelists. So thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Pete, Udi, Jon. It's been an extremely insightful conversation. Appreciate you sharing all your insight and thoughts and perspective on content marketing and where we're heading.